Hello and welcome back. This week's episode is going to be a little bit shorter than the two previous ones. I really just want it to be a way of saying hello and kind of introducing myself to those of you who don't know me or haven't seen my work before. Apologies in advance, this is going to be quite image rich, as in I'm going to be putting a lot of images up as I'm talking, and just really almost like turning pages of a book is the idea here. But I will be stopping from time to time just to kind of maybe have a longer look at certain images as we go along. Okay, so I took up photography in 1997, so almost 28 years ago. At that point in time I was working as a peripatetic percussion teacher for independent schools in West London and for Hertfordshire Music Service and a few other kind of privately as well. I had trained in the 1980s to be an orchestral percussionist at the Royal Academy of Music, but I found very early on that I really struggled with the kind of social side of being a musician. I found it very, very hard to do the socialising that kind of was necessary to help network and build a career. So I ended up really going into teaching, and it wasn't that long really before I kind of found that it essentially felt like Groundhog Day to me. I was going back every Monday into the same place at the same time to do the same thing, and it just didn't fit very easy with me. And I also had a deep kind of craving and longing to be outside. Even going back to the time when I was at music college, I remember my percussion teacher at the beginning of my third year, he was asking me what I'd been doing over the summer, and I was kind of relating a holiday in southern Scotland, climbing mountains and so on, and he was a bit crestfallen because he'd hoped I'd perhaps been on a few orchestral summer schools, or investing more time in my future as a musician, which I wasn't. So when I went out making images, it just felt like it was the right thing for me to be doing. It was a direct extension of the things that I'd always done to kind of free my mind a bit and relax, hill walking, woodland walking and so on. And as a keen collector of things, it just became something else I could add to kind of that list of things I collected, collecting images, collecting footpaths, just collecting experiences outdoors. I mentioned collecting footpaths. Here's just a quick illustration of what I used to do. In fact, actually what I still do today. I'm currently filling in a map of all the footpaths around where I live now. So when I started in '97, basically digital was on the horizon but hadn't really taken off. I joined a camera club in Amersham in Buckinghamshire. At that point in time, the monthly competitions, you took slides in and they were dropped into a carousel and projected, and I think pretty much everybody did the same thing. It was either print competitions or slide competitions. So I started off shooting 35mm and then very quickly progressed on to medium format with the 6.7 camera, Pentax 6.7, and then very quickly became aware of the limitations of medium formats with regard to depth of field, and that kind of problem was solved by moving up another size to large format, where all the cameras are effectively technical view cameras. They allow you to apply tilt, shift, swing, rise, fall and so on to help really kind of get your images sharp front to back. Of course, the downside of using these cameras is that they're big, heavy and cumbersome. I used to carry a Linhof zoom viewfinder around with me as well, so I could get an idea of what I wanted to shoot before I actually built the camera and set it all up and focused it. And unfortunately I lost that on the Isle of Ling. It's probably somewhere buried on the island as I speak. Once I'd lost that viewfinder, I realised that maybe the option was to carry a smaller camera instead, something that would actually take a photo as well as act as a viewfinder. So first camera at that point was a Ricoh Caplio R4, little tiny point and shoot camera, and then I replaced that with a Nikon D40X, a 10 megapixel camera, I progressed from that to a 12 megapixel Panasonic GF1 Lumix camera, which again was, you could fit different lenses on it, but essentially I just had the kit lens, micro four thirds camera. And all of those cameras really were just really carried to act as viewfinders for me with a large format. My main interest was still shooting large format, but as time went on and film became increasingly hard to get hold of and very, very expensive, I invested in a Sony A7R, the original Sony A7r4. This is back in 2015, and that camera I immediately dropped, and being a slightly less robust model, it got a fairly hefty dent in it, which was repairable, but I didn't really trust it after that, and I got another one. And since then I've basically worked my way up through the A7R2, A7R3 and A7R4. I actually stopped shooting large format altogether probably 4 years ago now. I got rid of my Ebony 12 years ago and replaced that with a lighter weight Chamonix, just so I had a large format camera I could take up hills. But again, I just found it very, very limiting, and while thoroughly enjoyable to use, I just liked having the speed now that I was getting from the Sony, and kind of having that ability to react to light, which with large format is often really, really hard to do. So what I did then was I got, basically for the best of both worlds, a Cambo Actus view camera, so I could put my Sony on the back and use medium format lenses on the front. And again, for maybe 3 or 4 years, that was my camera of choice. But again, climbing hills, you've got basically 2 entire solid metal cameras in the bag, as well as all the other things you might need. And if you want a wild camp with all those things that you need for that side of hill walking, then before long it just became too much of a strain. So I've no longer used the Cambo either, and if I want to get front to back sharpness, I compromise by using, as best I can, focus stacking. So these days I keep my kit fairly simple. It's a Sony A7r4 and 2 Sony lenses, a 24-105 and a 100-400mm. I always shoot off a tripod. Something I've always done anyway because of a large format, but I actually find it really liberating. I prefer to work with a tripod. I prefer to have my camera set up on the tripod, and then I'm free to wander and roam and have a look for other things as well. My camera's ready to go, but I'm not having to carry it. I'm not kind of framing things up through the camera. I'm kind of just using my eyes to see. I just prefer to have nothing between me and the subject matter when I'm looking for images. I still use neutral density graduated filters for all of my landscape photography. Where possible, I try to capture all the information in one frame, which is probably about 95% of the time. My favourite subject matter is still the dramatic mountain or coastal landscapes, partly because I think they still have the power to shock and surprise me, but also I enjoy the physical challenge of getting to and from the locations. That said, the weather and mountain light can be really fickle, so I've always found that the most successful days are those when I don't have a specific image in mind when I head out. I find it's far better to have an open mind and react to the conditions as they present themselves. So I might plan to climb a hill, but end up in woodland all day or shooting rusty details on an old building or vehicle I find. It's really all about matching the subject matter to the conditions and available light. It really frustrates me when I hear people say there's no light and they give up on a day, when there's actually a wealth of opportunity created by the conditions they find themselves out in. I genuinely can't remember a time when I've come home with no decent images, and if I'm not feeling it in the first place, I'll just go for a walk instead, and often the motivation returns. But if it doesn't, that's fine too. Really all that matters to me is getting outside and relaxing and enjoying my photography. There's no point in forcing yourself to make images when you're not in the mood, and there's very little commercial need to do that these days anyway. First and foremost, this really has got to be about enjoyment. Anyway, enough of my waffling on. Thank you very much for watching again. I'll leave you now with a small selection of images, slightly longer time to look at each one, and a bit of music. Please, if you can, like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much.